This is the story of Tendoji Arma, who, while he was at home at night, notices that, far away in the middle of the sea, a ship with people on board is attacked by a strange entity, which upon noticing Tendoji's presence awakens a demonic power within him. But leaving this aside, the next morning, at the scene of what was the destruction of the ship, we meet two other characters, on one side Ruri Aba and her butler Kagami, who upon seeing the entire crime scene comment that the only way to stop that monster is with the help of a certain person. And going back to Tendoji, we can notice that once he arrives at school, all the other students are frightened by his presence and fear approaching him, although there is a certain girl who thinks the opposite and does have many intentions of approaching, and it is Wakana. So then, later on, when our boy was on the roof of the school, Wakana goes to greet him to ask if he wants to join her club, since the day before she saw him collecting stones in a nearby river. But nevertheless, Tendoji tells her no, that he is not interested in joining her club. Anyway, while Wakana's friends took her away out of fear of our protagonist, she tells him that she will wait for him in front of the Hinoto Plaza to visit a museum of precious stones, if he feels like it. Later that same day, while Tendoji was heading home on his motorcycle, in parallel, Ruri and her Kagami plan to ambush our protagonist, because yes, the person they need help from is precisely Tendoji. That's why, after setting everything up, they both go to intercept him at the door of his house. Once with Tendoji, Ruri informs him of what happened a few days ago with the cruise ship, and that the incident was caused by a monster that is part of the Dark Stones. The thing is that the monster will surely attack again, and that's why they need the hidden power that Tendoji carries within. But for his part, the protagonist has no intention of helping, although at that moment, Kagami begins to intimidate him, as he begins to mention everything he knows about him. It turns out that Tendoji was abandoned by his father and lost his mother at a very young age, and at the age of 14 he awakened a hidden power with which he left 18 students in very serious condition. Upon these words, Tendoji begins to feel annoyed and does not want to listen to what Kagami says. So then, he involuntarily activates his powers and intends to attack Ruri. But the butler stops him and sends him flying. At that moment, this strange thing that is also a dark stone and is called Onigarawa warns them both that it is time to leave, since Tendoji is awakening his demonic powers. And that's exactly what they do. They both decide to abandon the mission, because otherwise they could have lost their lives. Moments later, when Tendoji was lamenting the bad moment he had gone through suddenly, he has a bad feeling that something is happening in the city. And yes, indeed, something bad is happening. It turns out that the dark stone known as Medusa is causing trouble, and is turning all the citizens into stone with her powers. On the other hand, Aba's organization learns of what happened. It is then that Kagami warns his squad to prepare to face the monster immediately. And going back to our protagonist, Tendoji decided to go in search of Medusa, since he was really only worried about Wakana, because she had told him that she was going to be waiting for him in the park. Although, on the other hand, the organization learns that the Dark Stone's objective is to obtain the jewel known as the Eye of Astheno, which apparently could grant it immortality, and precisely it is located in that museum that Wakana was going to visit. Likewise, at that, the organization appears to evacuate the entire place. And meanwhile, in the city, the monster begins to wreak havoc with its powers of speed and destruction. But suddenly, Kagami, using his convertible Batmobile, appears on the scene to fight, and thus stop it. Anyway, there is no point, even if Kagami tries to stop it. The Dark Stone takes him for a ride all over the area. Moments later, Medusa disappears, and it seems that now she is after Princess Ryura, because she has a special necklace with much more power than the Eye of Astheno, and if she consumes it all, it could mean the end. So after a while, the monster manages to find the princess's location and attacks the vehicle she was traveling in. However, when it did that, it turns out that our protagonist was arriving at the scene and saw that, because of him, Wakana was on the brink of death. It is for this reason that, demonstrating all his hatred towards Medusa, when she was about to devour Ryura, Tendoji sends her flying and ends up transforming into the demon he carries within. and without underestimating the power of the dark stone. But literally Tendoji, totally crazed, ends up giving it the beating of its life, as he parades it throughout the city and ends up filling it with punches. At that moment of madness, Kagami appears on the scene and knows that Tendoji is no longer himself, so he intends to attack him. But suddenly the princess stops him and does not let him hurt him, although the protagonist, upon seeing her, intends to attack her, but ends up not doing so as he remembers part of his past. In this way, he becomes human again and begins to lament that he does not want this power. And upon hearing those words, Ruri decides to give him the power of her jewel, which is one of the 7 sacred stones, with which our protagonist now dons a really cool armor and has overwhelming power. Still, not everything is rosy, since Medusa managed to consume the eye of Astheno, and now turned into a creepy monster. She heads to consume our boy. But that's what she thought, because now our protagonist with his new power shows the villain who the boss is. So, by breaking her 2 nuclei at the same time, Tendoji manages to put an end to the dark stone. In this way, everything returns to normal, and we find out that in the end Wakana is fine and only had superficial wounds. And now, with the situation more calm, a few days later, Tendoji decides to join Wakana's rock club as a show of his interest in her. But what he did not count on is that he would also meet Rura and Kagami, who now also form part of the institution, since the princess bought the school, and it's all to keep watch over our boy. And well, since the princess bought the school, now the place has changed radically and everything seems to be first class, even the food. On the other hand, Tendoji goes to Ruri's office, since she had summoned him there to talk to him. In this way, the protagonist once he arrives at the place meets Aniwagara, with whom he has a minor argument. But then, Ruri along with Kagami arrive at the place. This is how she tells him about the power he carries within. It turns out that 17 years ago, some alien meteorites fell to Earth, which carried precious jewels known as the 7 sacred stones or Sacred 7. And precisely one of those stones was the one that Ruri gave to our protagonist. Although there is something she makes clear to him, and that is that surely his mother must have had contact with the sacred stones at that time. And that is why Tendoji has that hidden power. In addition, she adds that those who had contact with the stones and were corrupted by their power are known as dark stones. But on the other hand, those who can control their power are known as light stones, meaning that when our boy receives the power of Ruri's stone and is with her, he is a light stone. But on the other hand, when he uses his own power and cannot control it, he is a dark stone. Next, Ruri confesses to him that she told him all this because the dark stones will reappear, and they definitely need his help to fight them. But before these words, Tendoji remains pensive and decides that he will think about it. That's why he ends up going to the river to look for some stones and also to think about Ruri's proposal. And in parallel, we see that at an American base, another bearer of the Sacred 7 appears, and using this robotic snake, or well, use your imagination because I don't know what the hell it is, it gets into one of the planes at the base. The point is that the reason why the Dark Stone decided to attack that base is not explained, but it is seen that the Yankees were transporting something very important directly to Japan. And moments later, we see that the plane that left the base ends up in pieces, and from it emerges a red sandstorm caused by a creepy monster. But going back to Tendoji, while he was looking for his stones, we learn the reason why he does it. It turns out that when the incident happened 4 years ago, and he left 18 students on the brink of death, it was because they took his sacred stone from him and threw it into this river. That is why he is always hanging around the place looking for his sacred stone. But now going back to the present, the organization learns of the approaching red sandstorm heading for Japan, so they decide to investigate to see what it is. Then they head to the area in a plane, and Kagami, upon approaching the storm, realizes that it is a dark stone. But that's not all, because when he is about to inform Ruri about this, he tells her that in addition to a dark stone, that plane was transporting some pretty large explosives, and if it approaches land in Japan, everything will be a terrible disaster. Due to this new inconvenience, Kagami goes in search of Tendoji to know if he will fight for them. That is why, to convince him, he tells him to accompany him and thus meet someone. So the two of them head to the Aba family mansion, where upon entering a room, the protagonist meets Aoi, Ruri's older sister. It is then that we learn the objective of the organization. It turns out that the day they took that photo, Ruri's parents were killed by a dark stone and Aoi was petrified in that jewel. It should be clarified that she also carries another sacred stone. And Ruri, faced with all this, decided to create the organization to get rid of all the dark stones, and supposedly in that way, she will be able to recover her sister. Although in the middle of their conversation, Ruri appears at the place and slaps Kagami for telling him about Aoi. But for his part, Tendoji, after hearing all that, promises that he will help them. In this way, a little later we see them all on a plane in the middle of the red sandstorm. And because the dark stone began to hit the plane, it lost control and caused our boy along with Aniwagara to fall into the void without their parachutes. Although upon seeing this, the princess decides to follow the protagonist, and that's how, once she manages to reunite with him in the heights, she again gives him the power of her stone so that Tendoji can transform. So now, with the power of the sacred stone, the protagonist begins to fight against the dark stone, but fails to find its nucleus. Although suddenly, Aniwagara being inside the monster shows our boy where its nucleus is. So, using his power, Tendoji manages to break the dark stone's nucleus and end its life once and for all. So then now, with the situation calmer, once the princess is safe and sound in her mansion, Kagami does not understand why Ruri trusts our protagonist so much without knowing him, but for her part, she tells him that Tendoji will always protect her, and this is because in the past our boy saved her life before she ended up crushed by a beam. And now, after a few days had passed, Ruri, after a long auction, finally got the Stone of Athena that was in the museum for a value of 9 million yen. To which, for her part, Aniwagara lets her know that it was a bit excessive the money she wasted in buying that stone. On the other hand, already at night, while Tendoji was still in search of his sacred stone, suddenly he has a bad feeling and decides to go to that place. And precisely the deductions of the protagonist were correct, since while Kagami was escorting this man named Kenmi, who is the bearer of another sacred stone, the dark stone from before appears in the place to face Kenmi. Although it does not have it as easy as it thinks, because when the dark stone begins to battle Kagami, at that moment Kenmi activates his sacred power, and demonstrating that he is on another level, he gives the dark stone a beating. Although in the midst of that clash, Tendoji, who was headed to the place, ends up being knocked off his motorcycle when dodging the body of the dark stone. And for some strange reason, the monster realizes that the protagonist is just like him, when he sees him beginning to be consumed by his hidden power. Next, the dark stone, seeing that it cannot stand up to Kenmi, decides to retreat. And for his part, Kenmi knows that he will have another opportunity, and now he is more intrigued by our protagonist. A few hours later, Tendoji is safe and sound in Ruri's mansion, to which she, for her part, has a meeting with Kenmi. It turns out that this man is a researcher, and he tells her that he is searching for these two kids who escaped from his research center, Kijima and Lao. Precisely, Kijima is the dark stone that recently attacked them. The point is that Kenmi wants to bring them back to his research center, and that is why he asks for her help and our protagonists to stop Kijima, since he is causing havoc everywhere. And on the other hand, we precisely see that Kijima arrives at the lair he has with Lao, who upon seeing that he can no longer control the sacred's power, gives him a dose of medication so that he returns to his human form. In this way, we learn that Kijima's objective is to eliminate Kenmi, because he thinks that the researcher is only using him and stealing part of his freedom. And in parallel, Tendoji is left thinking about what Kenmi told him about the bearers of the sacred, that they can be considered a god or a demon, but it depends on how they handle that power. Then, due to those words, Tendoji thinks that indeed he is a demon, although at that moment, Ruri appears on the scene and lets him know that for her he is not, and while he is by her side, he will not be any demon. But that now is the time to go visit Kenmi. In this way, moments later, the whole group heads to the doctor's research center, where he tells them that tests are carried out at this place so that the bearers of the Sacred Seven have a benefit for humanity. Next, everyone goes to the office, since Kenmi lets them know that Kijima is appearing at the place this very night to look for his medicines, and that's why it would be best to wait for him on the premises. In addition, he also tells them that it was Kijima's doing that awakened Medusa's power and that of the monster that formed the red sandstorm. For his part, Tendoji is not very convinced by Kenmi's words about his intention to help Kijima, so he questions him if it is possible that some bearer of the sacred could remain a dark stone forever. To this, Kenmi tells him that this is confidential and cannot tell him, but he lets him know that it could be true. A little later, everyone gets into position. So, at one point, Kijima makes his presence in the place, and we can notice it because Onigawara realizes it, and also because Tendoji begins to emanate the aura of his hidden power. So with this, Ruri decides as always to give him her power so that he becomes a light stone. In this way, now Tendoji has the ability to fight against the other boy. On the other hand, we see that, outside the facilities, Kagami is already facing off against another dark stone, while, for his part, Kijima headed to the place where the medicines are. But it turns out he fell into a trap, because one of Kenmi's workers starts to set him on fire and then electrocute him, managing to make the boy unable to get his medicines and end up escaping. And to make his situation worse, this girl called Arakyum, who works for Kenmi and is a bearer of a sacred seven, appears to try to stop him. But in any case, Kijima manages to escape, and then he manages to make his way with his dark stone towards Kenmi's office. In this way, in the place he meets our protagonist, who tries to make him see reason to stop fighting. But there is no case, so they both begin to fight for a good while. Although at one point, Kijima knows that he has everything to lose. That is why he decides for the moment to escape from the place, even without having obtained those medicines. And now, some time after those events, we see that, in the middle of a forest, Kenmi is facing off against a dark stone called Zero, which he ends up smashing to pieces. Moments later, already in his office, and while talking to his secretary, we learn from Kenmi that Arakyun is now facing off against the number 0 stone. Anyway, for the moment Kenmi is not happy with this, since his main objective is to get Kijima. And precisely going with the latter, while he begins to have memories of his past where they experimented on him, and let him know that he was always going to need these medicines. At that moment he comes to his senses, gets up and goes to inject himself with the little medicine he has left. Although that's not all, because when he goes to see how Lao is doing, he sees that she is using her own blood to create a serum to help him. It is there that Kijima says he has no other choice, so he intends to go after Ruri and in that way create the best medicine possible. And, on the other hand, at school, through paper shuriken, Ruri invites the protagonist to have lunch on the roof, which seems to embarrass Tendoji. So then, moments later, when the protagonist was lying in the place, Ruri appears with the lunch. And a somewhat awkward and tense moment is generated for Tendoji, since she has obvious intentions with the boy. But in the end, she ends up leaving when the protagonist shyly tells her that he prefers to spend time sunbathing. Because of this, later Ruri is left thinking about the protagonist's words, since she now thinks she is annoying. For this reason, while they were heading to a foundation meeting, she asks Kagami if she is annoying. At that moment, Kagami tries to make her see reason that this is not the case, although by being distracted, he unintentionally ends up hitting a girl with his car. But in reality, all this was a trap, since that girl was Lao. So while Kagami was seeing how the girl was doing, at that moment, Kijima appears inside the car and ends up taking Ruri away, as well as destroying Onigawara in the process. Next, Kagami, upon noticing that Ruri has disappeared, calls the council to ask them to locate her via her GPS, but they cannot find any trace of her. This is how an investigation is initiated to find out Ruri's whereabouts. Even Kenmi learns of the news and prepares to lend his assistance. On the other hand, later, Kagami ends up finding the protagonist at the river, where he informs him of the news but tells him not to get involved because if it is a dark stone, and Ruri not being with him, everything could get worse. Although before leaving, Kagami gives Onigawara to him to see what to do with it. So then later, Tendoji, being at home, tries to repair Onigawara while thinking about how he treated Ruri earlier. A while later, when he finishes gluing and taping the talking stone, it manages to come back to life. It is then that Onigawara informs him that Ruri was kidnapped by Kijima, and precisely the boy is heading here. And going with Kijima, we see that suddenly he runs into Arakune, so obviously the fight is inevitable. A bit of fighting. Although after stabbing her sword into one of his arms, Kijima decides to escape for the moment. And on the other hand, we see everyone gathered on the outskirts of the forest, where Arakune immediately appears, and they notice that she is quite badly injured. It is there that we learn from Kenmi that surely Kijima kidnapped Ruri to create that medicine, since, thanks to her, it is the only way that he can be a dark stone and have consciousness. In any case, now without Ruri, he lets our protagonist know that if he needs that medicine he can go to his laboratory whenever he wishes. But while he also lets everyone know that Arakune left a GPS embedded in Kijima, and thanks to that they can know his location. So now with everyone ready, Kenmi heads out in his helicopter to rescue Ruri. For his part, Kagami does the same, but Tendoji, wanting to follow him, he tells him not to do it, since in his situation he would only be a hindrance to the whole group. Anyway, the protagonist was not going to sit idly by, so he grabs his motorcycle and decides to follow Kagami. A while later, the girls from the Foundation indicate to him where Kijima's possible location could be, since where his signal appears to them. In that mountain there was an old Japanese military base, but they notice that Kijima is leaving that place. It is then that once Kagami arrives at the site, he notices that the protagonist has been following him. So he orders him that it would be best for him to investigate the mountain to find that military base, and that he will follow Kijima's trail, although before leaving he gives him something that seems to be quite valuable. And, on the other hand, Ruri is trapped in a room with Lao. At that, she asks her please to untie her to go to the bathroom. But it's all a trap, since when Lao does it, Ruri attacks her and manages to corner her. It is then that through her intuition of being a sacred, Ruri knows that Lao is just like her. In addition, she also realizes that the little girl was the one who escaped with Kijima from Kenmi's laboratory. It is there that Lao, being distressed, tells her the truth about why they escaped, and it is because Kenmi killed her brother. That is why Kijima has been protecting her, because they know that the human world is very cruel. And in parallel, Kagami followed Kijima's trail. But after a while he realizes that it is only a moving car and sees the GPS hanging from it. He immediately notifies the girls, but they cannot communicate with Tendoji. And we see that precisely our boy, in the basements of that forest, ends up meeting Kijima himself, who tells him to follow him, if he wants to know the whole truth. So, a while later, Tendoji ends up meeting Ruri, and everything seems to be fine between both sides. Although Kijima, upon seeing Lao, notices that she is not doing well. On her part, Ruri tells him that it is best to take her to a hospital. But Kijima tells her that it is impossible, because for society they do not exist. It is then that the dark stone lets them know that they are being manipulated by Kenmi. Next, he tells them that the laboratory is in charge of conducting experiments with those who use the sacred. Therefore, their main objective is to end Kenmi's life, since if he captures them, he will kill them, and they only want to gain their freedom. Once Kijima tells them the truth about Kenmi, suddenly a fireball falls towards the place and ends up collapsing everything. Although luckily for our group, the protagonist manages to save the two girls, but suddenly his powers begin to manifest. It is there that they notice the presence of that dark stone called Zero, with which Kenmi had previously fought. And well, Kenmi also arrives at the place. And as expected, the punches do not take long to appear. A bit of fighting. To Kijima's misfortune, he ends up getting beaten up by both Kenmi and the dark stone. But at that moment when they were about to deliver the final blow, Lao runs straight towards him, and Zero, upon seeing her, thinks of taking her life, although suddenly it stops, and it is there that Lao realizes that it is her dear brother. Anyway, at that moment, Kenmi attacks the monster and manages to knock it down. On the other hand, after so long, Ruri activates the protagonist's powers. I don't know why it took her so long, but oh well. The point is that now with Tendoji already transformed, Kenmi tells him that that is a dark stone without consciousness that escaped from the laboratory, and that is why they must eliminate it immediately. But well, for his part, the protagonist does not really believe those words. So because of that, when they are about to deliver the final blow to the monster, Tendoji decides not to deliver his best blow, because he remembers that Lao recognized it as her brother. Anyway, it seems that with that blow, they managed to defeat Zero. So then moments later, when everything is calmer, Kenmi lets them know that what Kijima told them is not true, since he would never do anything to a human, and that the bad thing is that now Kijima managed to escape and will surely continue to hurt other people. Because of these words, when Kenmi leaves, both protagonists are left wondering who they should really trust. Although well, we do know who we should trust, since from Kenmi we learned that he had already planned all this, and released Zero so that, in this way, the stone would go in search of its sister, and thus he could find Kijima. After this, and now going to the Able Organization's base, Kagami shows Ruri the reports on the Kenmi group, and apparently being public documents, they do not manage to obtain any relevant information of illicit information about Kenmi. In this way, Kagami decides that it is best to search for information on his own. That's why, after a few days, they meet with a former classmate of his from Harvard, who tells him that it would be best not to get involved against the Kenmi group, otherwise they will end their lives. And apparently this was overheard by Kenmi's secretary who was spying on them. On the other hand, Ruri went to see the protagonist so that he would sign a contract with her company. Basically, Ruri's plan is for Tendoji to work for them. But what she really wants is a way to keep him by her side. For his part, Tendoji is not very sure about signing those papers, so he goes outside to calm down and think about his decision. Although at that moment, since Onigawara knows Ruri's desires, he comes up with a plan for them to solidify their love. In this way, Onigawara pretends to disassemble, and that's why they wrap him in tape. Next, the talking stone tells them that to save him they must go to the city of Kamakura and find a certain stone, which once they have it in their possession, they both must take hands until the stone begins to shine. In reality, the idea for them to go to Kamakura is because it is said that if a boy and a girl hold hands there, they will end up falling in love. So since that is the only option, the next day they both decide to go together by train to Kamakura. Once there, it seems the thing was not going very well between them. A while later, they end up arriving at the place and getting that piece of stone, although when they hold hands nothing happens. In this way, since it was already lunchtime, they both go to eat some ramen, where Ruri does not seem very pleased with the food, but in the place, she lets our boy know her discomfort, about why she always treats her with disdain and acts like nothing matters to her. In other words, Ruri is right in what she says, but she is also quite capricious. For his part, after these words, Tendoji reconsiders and realizes that in part Ruri is right. It is like that the relationship between the two improves, to such an extent that after leaving the place, since the stone never shone, they decide to walk hand in hand throughout the city. And well, then we see them strolling throughout the city, even showing us how Tendoji tries to outrun a train, a rather absurd thing. But more absurd is that after that, Ruri fell hopelessly in love with the protagonist. I don't know what is so attractive about running alongside a train, but if it works with girls, I'll try it. Next, they both end up in front of a cliff and then on a beach, where Ruri gets hurt when she goes in, and as always Tendoji appears to rescue her. And basically, at the end of the day, they both greatly improved their relationship, to such an extent that Tendoji wishes to serve her devotedly. The next day, they arrive at Ruri's mansion, where they are received by all the maids and by Onigawara, who is safe and sound. It is there that he lets them know that everything was a lie, and he only pretended that he needed their help so that they could unite their love. Although leaving love aside, we see that in the lair of the Kenmi group, Kenmi is already aware that the Aba group is suspicious of them, so he thinks to take action on the matter. And now a few weeks later, since Tandoji decided to accept Ruri's contract, from that moment on Kagami began to train him physically to keep him in good shape. But due to this, in addition to being exhausted from all the training, our protagonist also forgot to do part of his duties, and because of this, the teacher forced him to take a makeup exam. And, on the other hand, going to the Aba organization's base, the maids located that on the Miura Peninsula, there was a dark stone causing trouble. But not just one, they also located another one heading to Yokosuka. Yes, 2 dark stones in a very short time. So quickly, Ruri asks for our boy's help, who already at night decides to go face the dark stone lamp head. But basically Tandoji cannot stand up to it, even a little bit, since it gives him a real beating and sends him flying several times. And, on the other hand, the other dark stone, as soon as it enters the city, is intercepted by the entire Aba organization. But they also fail to do any damage to it, because nothing manages to hurt it. And to make matters worse, when it eats Kagami's robotic arm, this causes it to gain power and increase in size. So, with the situation quite complicated for our group, Ruri decides to use her most powerful weapon in her arsenal, and it is this laser beam cannon. Although for the moment she cannot use it, because it has not charged 100%. And going back to the protagonist, we see that he is still receiving a real beating. And if that were not enough, the stone begins to run towards the city. And returning to the city, finally Ruri's cannon has charged. But just as she is about to shoot at it, her shot fails, and she fails to end the dark stone's life, which quite furious begins to eat all the equipment of the princess's cannon. So without another option for the moment, the Aba organization decides to flee, and as best they can continue attacking to stop the stone's advance. And on the side of the protagonist, he is still receiving a brutal beating, fight. But at that moment, remembering everything he went through and what he is really fighting for, to defend his friends, Tandoji has an ass-pulled power-up, and with his new power, with a good punch he ends the dark stone's life. And now, having finished with one and knowing where the other dark stone is located, with his super suit he activates his super speed, and in a matter of seconds he ends up arriving at the place, just in time to save Ruri's life. And also, with a good punch he destroys the fat stone. But it does not end there, since next, both stones fuse and create an atomic rocket headed for the big city. Obviously no one expected this, although Tandoji, being out of energy, but having an unwavering heart, decides once and for all to eliminate this threat. So ordering his suit to give him something so he can fly. Because yes, our boy's suit is like an alchemist. In this way, the suit gives him the special ability to fly, and heading straight for the dark stones. Now yes, once and for all he manages to end the entire threat. And it seems that the ashes of what was left of that attack reached the entire city, even where Aoi is. So a few days after this event, we see that in Ruri's mansion, the maids call her desperately to see her sister. So once Ruri arrives at the room, she notices that the crystal where Aoi was is about to break. Because of this, neither Ruri nor Kagami attended school, although a while later she appears at the place to call Tandoji. Next, Tandoji heads to Ruri's mansion, and they inform him of what happened with Aoi, that the crystal where she was trapped broke, and now she is in a coma. For his part, Onigawara tells them that this may have happened because of Tandoji, since when he used his power the other day, that power he had never used before, and because of the resonance of the sacred, it may have affected Aoi, since both Aoi and Ruri share the same blood. Yes, I know, a whole mess. But that's more or less what I could understand. Because of all this, both Ruri and Tandoji begin to look for a solution as to why this happened. So our protagonist asks her to tell him everything that happened 5 years ago, when her parents died and Aoi was crystallized. In this way, we travel to the past, and we find ourselves on Christmas Eve, where the entire Aba family, including Kagami and his father, were preparing all the decorations for the Christmas party. A while later, the three youngest ones went to another room to finish a gift they wanted to give to their parents. Although at that, when they realize they forgot something in the main room, Ruri decides to go get it. But before arriving, she overhears the meeting her parents were having with Kenmi, where the Abas informed him that they would no longer fund his research, since what he was doing was inhumane and unethical. The next morning, before everyone left for the country house where they were going to spend Christmas, while they were preparing their things, Aoi unintentionally ended up breaking the gift that both sisters had made for their parents. Because of this, Ruri was really angry and fought with her sister for ruining the gift. Next, once everyone was about to go to the country house, Kagami's father ordered his son that when Ruri calmed down and was better, that they both head to the country house so that the two sisters could reconcile. So in this way, the entire Aba family ended up traveling to that place, where everything seemed to be going wonderfully. But at a certain point in the night, the dark stone zero appeared at the place. And, on the other hand, Ruri and Kagami were still at the Aba residence, and the little mistress was lamenting having treated her sister badly. But well, to remedy her mistake, after a while she finished assembling the gift that was for her parents, and then both of them headed to the country house. But just returning to this place, while Kagami's father was outside, he noticed the presence of the dark stone. So he decided to fight against it. But there was no point. The stone was on another level and soon left him out of combat. And moments later, it broke into the mansion, where in a few minutes it eliminated all the maids, then Ruri's father and finally her mother. Although at the moment of eliminating Aoi, it was at that instant that she crystallized, and surely it was because of the fact of protecting herself from Zero's attack. So later on, once Ruri and Kagami arrive at the place, they notice that everything is chaos, and it is there that they find Aoi's body among the flames. And now returning to the present, when Ruri finishes telling the story to the protagonist, both of them agree to destroy what remains of the sacred stones and put an end to this disaster once and for all. Then, Tendoji meets with Kijima at night in the city, where our protagonist tries to make him join them in the battle against the Dark Stones. But on the other hand, Kijima does not agree to make an alliance, and for now the only thing he wants is to end Dr. Kenmi's life. And now on Kenmi's side, knowing that the Aba organization suspects them, a few days later the news is made on all television media that there is an arrest warrant for Ruri Aba, because supposedly her company has been evading taxes, so they end up blocking access to all her accounts. And to make matters worse, a little while later, some government agents appear with the arrest warrant for the princess. For his part, Kagami meets with the protagonist and tells him that they also arrested all the maids, and for some reason, they surrounded the mansion and do not let anyone approach. And while they were thinking about what to do, Kenmi's armed men break up their meeting. And when our guys were about to be captured, at that moment, some of the maids appear on the scene, and in the blink of an eye they manage to take care of all of Kenmi's men. Although she is not the only one who appears to help them, since suddenly Lao arrives at the place informing them that she wants to help them and free her brother. Besides the fact that Kijima has already headed to the facilities to face Kenmi. And on the other hand, Ruri wakes up in Kenmi's facilities, and as expected, all this was planned by the doctor, since his main idea now is to destroy the Aba organization and be the only one to control the power of the sacred stones. Although part of his plan is also to obtain Ruri's heart, and thus have the power of the gods, if one thing is crazy, but that is his idea. So then he proceeds to remove the heart from the princess, but suddenly she releases a powerful gust of light. And as expected as happened with her sister, Ruri in a critical moment also ended up crystallizing. Because of this, Kenmi soon thinks of using his Cyclops to destroy Ruri's body and thus take possession of her core or her stone. Although at that moment, Kijima breaks into the facilities and manages to make his way through the upper part of the place. And going back to our group, they all also manage to reach Kenmi's base, where once inside, while Kagami faces Arakune, and the maids face the guards, our protagonist along with Lao enters the corridors to reach where Ruri is. Although in the middle of the way, Zero makes his appearance and begins to fight against Tendoji. So when the monster blows up a huge room, at that moment, Tendoji notices a sacred stone among the rubble. And by the plot it turns out that that sacred stone was the one his mother had given him, which I imagine was kept there. Otherwise I don't find the logic, but oh well. The thing is that, at that moment, Kijima saves the protagonist and blows Zero away. It is there that Lao shows her friend that she brought the medicine to save her brother. That, even if she gives him the opportunity to inject him, and see if he can return to normal. And on the other hand, Tendoji managed to escape the place and went to look for Ruri. So that when he finally finds her and sees that she is crystallized, he decides to give her all his will along with his stone so that she can return to normal again. And it is there that they show us a flashback, that at the moment when Tendoji saved the princess from those beams, it was when Ruri's mother found out about the power that Tendoji had, and that is why she gave Tendoji's mother one of the sacred stones so that our protagonist could control his power. This is how, once they return to the present, Tendoji manages to free Ruri from her crystallization. But in exchange he ended up losing his sacred stone, which does not worry him, since he lets her know that now he has her, and that is all that matters to him. Anyway, although the moment is very nice and everything, Kenmi appears to interrupt their love. So he confesses to Tendoji that everything that has happened until now, absolutely all the events of the dark stones that happened were his works, since his intention was for the protagonist to go crazy, because he knew the power he was hiding inside, and he just wanted him to polish it so that he could take possession of it later. And while he kept saying recognize things, suddenly Zero bursts into the place to eliminate everyone, because it seems that the medicine that Lao injected him did not work. And now the only thing on his mind is to kill everyone who hurt his sister. But just when he was about to do that, suddenly, Kenmi stabs him from behind and takes away his core, thus ending his life. And then, he uses that core on himself and thus awakened the great power of the gods that he talked about so much. So now he puts on a really cool armor, and the villainous villain of Kenmi is ready to have some good fist fights with our group. Moments later, Kenmi grabs Lao and takes her outside the facilities. For his part, Kijima follows them to eliminate him, and it is there that, being alone, Tendoji asks Ruri to lend him her power, although this time, she decides to give him all her will, which I don't know if it's like a kind of pact or what. But now our guy has a different armor from the previous one, and I imagine that it will make him stronger, otherwise it doesn't make sense. On the other hand, these two continue fighting with everything they have. Fight. But at a certain point, Lao thinks that all this is her fault, that Kijima continues to suffer despite no longer being under Kenmi's command, which is why she asks the villain to eliminate her once and for all, so that her friend can be at peace. So Kenmi decides to grant her wish. So when he was about to do it, suddenly the protagonist appears to save her and subdue Kenmi for a moment. But he at that moment begins to electrocute Kijima and ends up leaving him on the verge of death, so much so that he ends up passed out at the bottom of the facilities. And because of this, Lao, being furious, ends up transforming into a dark stone, and now her only wish is that everyone dies. On the other hand, Kagami, after a long confrontation, ends up defeating Arakune, and in this way, he goes to meet Aoi, who apparently had also been kidnapped and was with Onigawara, which does not explain at what moment she returned to normal, but well, now she is fine. In this way, she asks Kagami if she knows how to stop all this. And going back to our protagonist, now he is in charge of facing Kenmi. So the good fist fights don't take long to appear. Fight. Moments later, Lao begins to give everything to Kenmi to eliminate him. But, on the contrary, this only caused the villain to absorb her powers. And then thanks to that, now he took on another appearance and transformed into Kenmi Cooler Golden. and he is more unhinged than ever. This is how he demonstrates his maximum power, with which he intends to finish everyone off, and thus take possession of their sacred stones. But on the other hand, our guy shows him why he is the protagonist, and giving his maximum power, with a good kick in the face, he blows up the villain and manages to leave him on the verge of death. The thing is that Kenmi ends up reaching where Lao is, and while he is petrifying, he decides to give his last blow with the little he has left. It is there that he takes Lao and throws himself along with her to the bottom of the facilities. And as they fall, he introduces his will, and that of his brother into her. That is, he puts his sacred stone into her. And now everything goes to hell, since Lao transforms into a gigantic crystallized jewel, and her only intention is to mess up the whole world, because she wants to die for having blamed herself for her brother's death and Kijima's emotions. Next, she begins to destroy everything in her path, while our guy doesn't know what to do to stop her. But it is there that Aoi comes on the scene, and decides to give her jewel power to Kijima, since he is the only one who can calm his friend's power and manage to remove that evil core from her. In this way, Kijima gets a really cool armor and goes along with our protagonist to end this once and for all. So while Tendoji tries to make Lao understand how important life and the people for whom she must live are, at that moment, Kijima enters her crystallized zone, and using his magical power he manages once and for all to remove that evil jewel that was corrupting her. And that's how our guys managed to put an end to all this chaos. And on the other hand, with everything calmer, Ruri has just realized that her sister has come back to life. So she ends up giving her a big hug in front of everyone, even Tendoji, who upon seeing them cannot help but cry with emotion. And so, after a few days, now with Kenmi out of the way, everything returned to normal, since Ruri managed to prove her innocence of the charges she was accused of, and our guy was finally able to accept his destiny, which is why he throws the necklace his mother had given him to the bottom of the sea. And then he goes along with the whole geology club to enjoy a great time together. The video ends here. If you enjoyed the video, please like the video and subscribe to the channel.